Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is Paul Zeise. Obviously, we are here, and it is beautiful. What is it, Tuesday afternoon on I don't know, what do we call it? The day after. I guess it's not the eve, it's the day after the Steelers got to 6-2 with a win over the Giants. Adam Bittner and I had talked about it last night on the YouTube channel right after the game. So we wrapped up a lot of the game. There's not a whole lot really that we need to go over about the game other than the fact that they did what they had to do. And as I said last night, it is imperative that they won the game. Style points to me don't matter. Style points when you're playing bad teams early in the season. Do you know what you would rather be? A team that didn't get a whole lot of style points, but you won the game, rather than being the Ravens who lost the game, even though, they did some really good things. They lost the game to a bad team. You'd much rather win a game. But before we get started, we would like to thank our sponsor. The game's always on at Archie's on Carson, Pittsburgh's best place for food, drinks, and sports. Open Sundays for the game, 12 to 2 a.m. Be sure to check the daily drink specials and stop in for 80-cent wing nights Monday through Thursday. Tell them Paul Zeise sent you when you get there as well. As of course, they have the Paul Zeise grilled cheese, which people say to me, what is on the Paul Zeise grilled cheese at Archie's? And I'll tell you, very simple. What's on the Paul Zeise grilled cheese is cheese. I'm a very simple person. So there you have it, but you can have it any way you want. It's like a Burger King type thing. You can have it any way you want to have it. So let's talk about the Steelers. And that's, I think, one of the biggest things that, we are going to break down right now, the Steelers. Here's what I'm going to tell you. I think that it's pretty important to beat the bad teams on your schedule. I do. I think that there's a lot of teams in the NFL that lose to bad teams, and, we could argue about who the Steelers have beaten and lost to. But I think at the end of the day, if you look at the Steelers, right now, with their passing game sort of developed the way it's developed with Russell Wilson, I'm going to tell you this much. I think, are you going to listen up? I think that the Steelers are one of the three best teams in the AFC. Maybe four. I think there are four teams in the AFC that are relevant. The Steelers are one of them. I think that the rest of the AFC is probably a little bit behind these teams. And who are the four teams? Well, obviously, the Chiefs are one of them, and the Bills are one of them. I mean, I think both of those teams we've seen when they play at their best, they're really hard to beat. When they're at their best, in fact, if Patrick Mahomes is at his best, I've said this before, if he's at his best and he's playing really well, I don't care who's on his team. I don't care who is with him. I don't care whatever, you want to say about it. They're the best team. But beyond that, you've got, I think the Bills are the same way. The Bills, though, are beatable because they make a lot of mistakes at times. And so they have to, figure out a way to cut down mistakes. But when they're playing at a high level, they're one of the best teams as well. I know they just lost to the Browns, and it looked ugly at times for them, but I still believe that the Ravens are one of the best teams. And you know what? The Steelers are in there too. I think the way that they throw the ball now with Russell Wilson, listen, Mike Tomlin obviously knew what he wanted when he was looking for a new quarterback. He obviously knew that he wanted Russell Wilson because Russell Wilson gives them a passing game they have not had since – Ben Roethlisberger before he got hurt. I mean, if you think about the throws that Russell Wilson made last night, Steelers haven't had a passing game like that. They haven't seen passes like that. I mean, the dime that he threw to Pickens on the sideline, the dime that he threw down the field to Calvin Austin, the dime that he threw to Van Jefferson. Those kind of throws we have not seen from a Steelers quarterback since probably, the year before Ben Roethlisberger hurt his shoulder or whatever, was out for that whole season when they had, Mason Rudolph and Duck Hodges, fighting for the starting position or whatever. Ben came back and he was okay the next year. And then, obviously age, father time is undefeated and all that other good stuff. It was pretty clear that he wasn't the same quarterback. But my point is we haven't seen that kind of throw and that kind of ability to pass and that kind of ability to read defenses and that kind of ability to run offense. We haven't seen that. We just haven't in a long, long time. And so to me, I think when you look at the Steelers and you add their defense in and you add in what they are capable of doing in the run game, listen, they are as good as pretty much anybody in the AFC. I wouldn't have said that 3 or 4 weeks ago. 3 or 4 weeks ago, I thought they were more a product of the fact that they've got, they've got a bad scale or they play some bad teams or whatever. I said that 3 or 4 weeks ago, but I'm going to tell you, watching them these last couple of weeks with Russell Wilson, I don't know how you can't get excited about what they're doing. I mean, at the end of the day, they are able to beat you in a lot of different ways. And then last night, one of the things that really creeped up last night that we hadn't seen maybe as much of is their special teams. Think about their special teams last night and how they changed the game. And quite frankly, Calvin Austin's return probably was the biggest play in the game. They were reeling and looking for some things, and their offense really wasn't struggling. They just kept shooting themselves in the foot when they got into the red zone or when they got down there. I mean, really, George Pickens, it's 1 foot, he's this far, I guess, away from getting his second foot down. That's a touchdown instead of a field goal. And then, in the first half, was it Broderick Jones that had the face mask? Otherwise, that's a touchdown. I mean, they moved the ball pretty well. They had 400-plus yards of offense. Again, I get it. The Giants stink. But you know what? Good teams blow out bad teams. And ask the Ravens if they would love to have, sputtered a little bit against the Browns and figured out a way to win the game, because they didn't. They lost. So I just think that really the optimism around the Steelers that's growing, and you can feel it too. If you look at some of these national hot take guys and some of these national hot take shows, it's growing, and it's probably good, and it's probably rightful that it is growing, because frankly, the Steelers are clearly going to be one of the best teams in the AFC when it's all said and done. Does that mean they're going to get to the Super Bowl? No, but I will say this. I believe it a lot more now than I did maybe 3 weeks ago. If you tell me, hey, they're in the AFC Championship game in a few months, I believe it. I could absolutely see a path for them to get there. And quite frankly, I mean, the only team I consider to be unbeatable is the Chiefs. But hear me out. What I mean by that is if they're in the playoffs and Patrick Mahomes is playing, at a high level, I just don't see. You got. It's like, I said last week, it's like when Michael Jordan in the 90s, you got to beat him. So that's the only team that I would say, well, and I don't think they're unbeatable, but my point is if they show up and they play as well as they play and their quarterback is playing as well as he can play, I think that's the only team really that probably is going to be out of the reach of anybody to beat them. But anybody else? You mean to tell me the Steelers couldn't beat the Bills? You mean to tell me the Steelers couldn't beat the Ravens? Interestingly enough, did you see the Ravens made a move for a wide receiver? And it's a name we're very familiar with. They made a trade and they swapped picks and whatnot, but they got Deontay Johnson. I think it's incredible timing that they got Deontay Johnson, because I know that the Steelers play him in a couple of weeks. And I know that Steeler fans still, I see it on these chats all the time. I see it all the time. It is one of these things where they are still angry about the fact that he runs backwards and all the other stuff that they say he does. So to me, that adds a little bit of intrigue to the Ravens game. But again, you mean to tell me the Steelers couldn't beat the Ravens? I just don't. I don't. One of the problems that the Ravens have, and this is, I've said this for at least 5 years. Is for all of the talk about John Harbaugh being this great coach, John Harbaugh being this great coach and this smart guy, and of course all of his love of analytics and all this other stuff. The Ravens are the dumbest team I've ever seen. They make so many dumb mistakes. They shoot themselves in the foot. Their decisions to go for it on fourth down all the time and pass up field goals are just idiotic for the most part. Going for two when there's no reason to go for two. They fumble at the worst time. time. They seem to throw interceptions at the worst time. I say it all the time, but the Ravens really, for as talented as they are and as good as their quarterback is, and he's dynamic, they are really legitimately the dumbest team I've ever seen. So to me, they're going to give every team they play in the playoffs is going to have a chance to beat them. Now, I know that they went out and got Deontay Johnson today because, obviously they're trying to really enhance their passing game because just like the whole thing with the Steelers bringing Russell Wilson here, everybody knows in the AFC, if you're going to win, you might have to match in a shootout, Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. Now, the one team that we're not talking about, but I happen to think that it is one of these things where they were probably maybe a year early last year, and they're taking a little step back this year, and especially now that Stephon Diggs is out for the season. The Texans are an interesting team to me, obviously. They've got a dynamic young quarterback. I think the Steelers would beat them. I really do. I think the Steelers would basically be able to physically pound them. And I think the Steelers defense would be fine against C.J. Stroud. I know he lit him up last year, but the bottom line is, you see that offense once now. You take away some of the weapons that they have, and all of a sudden, that team isn't all that scary. So, I mean, and then you get beyond the Texans. I mean, who are we talking about? I mean, to be honest, the next two best teams might be Denver and the Chargers. And, at the end of the day, the Steelers beat them both. Denver is, winning some games right now. I think they're 5-3 or whatever they are. I don't know how good they actually are, but they've got a good defense in terms of their defense is really good. I saw a stat today. They're number one in yards per play against. In other words, they're the toughest team to theoretically move the ball against. But you got Bo Nix and that offense. I mean, that they look to me like an 8-9, 9-8 kind of team. The Chargers, listen, Jim Harbaugh is an exceptional coach. A. B, they are now moving from what they were over the course of, a number of years, which was the team that always made mistakes and killed themselves and shot themselves in the foot, to a team that really doesn't beat themselves. But if you really want to look at the Chargers this year, take a look at the weapons around Justin Herbert and tell me who scares you. I mean, that looks to me like a team that is a couple of years away from really legitimately being a contender. Even though they've got the quarterback in place, they need some help on their offensive line. They need some help with the, at the skill positions. But, they're the kind of team that they can get into the playoffs, with a 9 wins or 10 wins. And, that's the kind of team the Steelers might have to play in the first round. But honestly, I think if you look at the AFC, there are 4 teams, and then there's a big drop-off. I mean, I don't necessarily think there's that big of a difference between the Chargers and Broncos and, say, even like the Raiders and some of these other teams. The Dolphins, I'm going to tell you, I've said this many times, the Dolphins to me are soft. They're mentally soft. I think the quarterback is way overrated. I think the coach is even more overrated. I mean, the Dolphins to me are a team that basically they're not really even a factor. The Jets were supposed to be good. Remember that? This was going to be the year the Jets got it all together. Well, you know what? They've got a reasonably good roster. That's what's amazing. But they've got problems. And it's funny, like in narratives, everybody hates Aaron Rodgers, because Aaron Rodgers has said things that, upsets the sensitivities of certain people. But the reality is their bigger problem the last 2 weeks has been their kicker stinks. If their kicker just makes kicks he's supposed to make, they win these 2 games. They're 4-4, and now all of a sudden nobody's talking about Aaron Rodgers. That's not for me to say that Aaron Rodgers has clearly lived up to what they thought he was going to be. It's only to say, okay, that I think reality is, I think that it is it's one of those things that Aaron Rodgers hasn't been as bad as people want to say. He's thrown some interceptions. He has been basically he's been a guy who, if they got some help from their kicker, they'd be 4-4 and they'd be right in the thick of it because, like I said, the AFC is just basically, I don't know. It's 4 teams, I think, that are much better than everybody else. And then the rest, who knows? I would say the Texans are probably the 5th best team, but then you tell me who you think is the 6th best team. If you're willing to concede that the Ravens and Steelers, Chiefs, Bills, and Texans are the 5 best teams, who's 6 and 7? Is it the Chargers? Is it the Broncos? I mean, if they got on a run, could it be the Jets? I don't think so, but could it be the Jets? Probably not. Could it be the Dolphins? Probably not. I just look at the AFC, and I think it's a 4-horse race with a 5th team that's right in there, maybe a little bit behind, and then the rest of the AFC is bad. So if you don't believe that the Steelers can get to the Super Bowl, you're not paying attention. Again, I will say this, and I'll say this again. If Patrick Mahomes is playing at his best, if he's healthy and he's playing at his best, everybody's playing for second. That doesn't mean that they can't be beat. It just means I have to see a team beat them. There's a difference. I'm not saying they're invincible, but if he is playing at his best, you have to beat him to get to the Super Bowl. I don't care who you are. We saw it last year, okay, where they went on the road and he beat a couple of teams. They went on the road and they beat a couple of teams. What was it? I think they beat Buffalo and then they beat Baltimore. Player for player, Baltimore was probably better than them. But you still have to beat Patrick Mahomes. And that's the toughest thing about all of this stuff is that, and last year their offense was garbage. This year, they've actually got him some help. But last year, their offense was garbage. But guess what? He was good enough to get the – so you take them out of the equation, the Steelers are right there with anybody else. The Steelers at their best. And quite frankly, I'm not saying don't take it to – I'm saying, as I said, he said that the Steelers can't beat the Chiefs. That's not what I said. What I said was that Patrick Mahomes has become that guy, like Michael Jordan in the 90s, whereas – if he's healthy, you got to beat him. But other than him, I honestly think the Steelers are right there with all of these teams. Every single team that we've mentioned here, they're with them. So, I really thought Sunday or Monday night, there was a lot of people that were angry about the way the Steelers played and they let a team hang around and all this stuff. Listen, they had a couple of untimely penalties and a couple of mistakes. Otherwise, they might have scored 45 points in that game if you really watch the game. They moved the ball almost at will against the Giants. And again, the Giants stink. I'm not sitting here. I get it. And that's a part of it. But the other part of it is, like I said, good teams blow out bad teams. Good teams blow out bad teams, especially at home. And it's the NFL. I hate the cliches that people throw around. Well, everybody, they're all driving Mercedes. They all have pros. They all drive. Screw that. Okay. Some teams are bad and other teams aren't bad. I think the Steelers and the one thing that's the most exciting thing about the Steelers, if you're a Steeler fan, is that they are still a work in progress on offense even. Now, defensively, we can talk about some of the things that reared their ugly head the other day. Last night, one of the most glaring things is their inability to stop the run at times. The Giants ran up and down on them in many ways, averaged, I think what they averaged, like 5 yards a carry, something like that. Let me see. 6.3 yards a carry is what the Giants averaged last night running against the Steelers. That's not good. That's not sustainable. And if they do that, they could have a real problem, obviously, against the Ravens to start. But even against the Chiefs, because the one thing about the Chiefs, what I like about Andy Reid and his offense is if you're, really, really keen on stopping their passing game, they'll run the ball. They'll do what they have to do. So the Steelers, they need to clean that up. And I thought a part of what, where I was sitting in the press box, what I could see in the run game, I thought that a number of times at the point of attack, they took really bad angles, and and it wasn't just, the defensive linemen. It wasn't just the offense, the defense, the linebackers, the outside linebackers, the inside linebacker. At the point of attack, there were a number of times where the crease was there because somebody took a really bad angle. I think of Landon Roberts. He's been good in terms of him lowering the boom. He's been a guy that sort of brings a little physicality, but he's also a guy that at times is in the wrong position or his aggression takes him out of the play. Patrick Queen, still waiting to see him. Still waiting to see a whole lot from him. I haven't seen a whole lot that makes me excited about him. But again, technically still learning the defense and finding his role. Peyton Wilson, I love that kid. I think he's a guy that is really good. But again, he's a rookie. He's going to make mistakes. But there were a couple of big plays where, like the one big play where Landon Roberts ran right sort of by the running back because he was being aggressive and he was going to the point of attack. Well, the running back made a little cutback and there was a crease and, it was like a 12 or 13-yard carry. Then there was the long touchdown at the end or whatever. I mean, there are a lot of things that the defense needs to clean up. But here's the thing. I don't think defense is the problem with this team. I don't think it's – I think Joey Porter Jr., at times he gets a little bit too physical and, he's gotten away with it a little bit. I'm sure there'll be some flags in his future, though. But at the end of the day, I think that the defense is physical. I think the defense is deep. I think that the defense is going to be a strength. I don't know that you have to worry about them, even though, again, they gave up a lot of yards on the ground last night. But I do think what should excite you is that this is Russell Wilson's second game. Second game. And he had, and I think he threw the ball to 9 different receivers. Now, I think 8 different receivers actually caught the ball. Scotty Miller, I think, was targeted twice and didn't catch it. The one he should have caught, by the way, down the near sidelines, right in front of us, right in front of the Steelers bench there. He should have caught that. That would have been a 9th receiver that caught the ball. And when I say receiver, obviously I'm talking about running backs, tight ends, whatever. But the reality is, him being able to distribute the ball tells you everything you need to know about how well he reads defenses, how well he sees the field, how well he scans and makes, the throws that he needs to make. The other big development yesterday, I think Van Jefferson, I have it right here, in fact. I think Van Jefferson had, 4 catches, and Calvin Austin had 3. That's huge. Between their 3 receivers, they had 11 catches yesterday. That's kind of what you need to see. Calvin Austin, Van Jefferson, giving them an actual alternative to George Pickens. So to me, all I'm saying is, anybody that knows me knows I'm not usually really overly rosy picture coming off a win against a bad team. Because I say, if you're the Steelers and you have playoff aspirations, you should beat the Giants. And you should, rack up a bunch of yards against that defense. I get that. But here's the thing. If you look at the last few years that we've had here, think about this. How bad this offense has been against bad teams. Where, a game like last night, they had to win, they would have had to win 16-13 because they couldn't score, even against bad teams. So I think that you have to keep it into perspective, and that is for the first time since like 2018 or 17 or something like that, they had back-to-back weeks where they had 400 yards of offense. That's something. That means something, and it should mean something. Watching Russell Wilson throw the ball, you know what? I was one that said Justin Fields didn't deserve to lose his job, and I still believe he didn't deserve to lose his job. But clearly Russell Wilson has given them a different dimension in the passing game. That doesn't mean Justin Fields is, buried for the rest of his life or his career or whatever. But I do think one of the things that happens now as it gets really interesting is if Russell Wilson finishes the season playing the way that he's playing, the Steelers probably are going to have to think about, okay, we give him a 2-year, what, 60 million, 2 years, 70 million, something like that. And you can laugh and say, well, they're not going to give a guy that 35 million or 40 million. Really? Because the going rate now is 55 or 60 million. That's what the going rate is. The next quarterback that signs, next one of these young guys that signs he's a franchise quarterback and he signs a deal, he's going to probably get 56, 57, 58, maybe $60 million. So even though Russell Wilson is old or whatever you want to say he is or older, if he has a good season and he plays really well, the Steelers are going to have to think about, well, we're probably going to have to give this guy $35, $40 million a year for 2 years. And if they don't, someone else will, if he plays well. But where does that leave Justin Fields is very interesting, because Fields obviously was supposed to be a guy, well, we're going to, maybe make him one of our quarterbacks of the future. We're going to sign him. He was hoping to cash in, but if he doesn't play, where does his value become? Would the Steelers be able to steal him for nothing? I just don't know. I just think that's going to be intriguing, but that's down the road. The bottom line is Russell Wilson has given this offense a dimension they did not have. A dimension they did not have, which is the passing game. And if you watch some of the throws he made last night and you can't understand how that's different from what they were doing before, and I don't mean just this year, I mean for the last 4 years, right? Russell Wilson is the best passer the Steelers have had since Ben before his injury. And I would say the second best passer is probably Mason Rudolph, which tells you, well, pretty much everything you need to know about the quarterback situation from, the last, 5 or 6 years. But if you look around the NFL, I think what Mike Tomlin has figured out is you better be able to throw the ball. You better be able to make passes on time, deliver them in a place where only your guys can catch them. And Russell Wilson did that. I thought the pass to George Pickens down George Pickens down the sideline was an incredible throw. Maybe even better than the touchdown he threw to, was it Calvin Austin? He threw the touchdown. Both of them were dimes, absolute dimes. I just feel that that's the thing that they have now, and that's what Mike Tomlin was looking for. I think that's what he wanted. I think he wanted a passing game. And so now they have it. And here's the thing, they're a work in progress. That's the beauty of it. The offensive line still has some ways to go. They probably still need to find the right 5 combination, because the injuries have just sort of wreaked havoc with what they thought coming into the season was going to be their 5 up front. They get that together. If Calvin Austin and Van Jefferson continue to just sort of cut out their roles a little bit and figure out how they fit in. If Mount Washington continues to be a little bit of a factor more and more each week, with Najee Harris running the way that he's run, this offense can be much, much, much better than it even is right now. So I think that's what should excite you if you're a Steelers fan. Not that they beat the Giants and the Jets back-to-back. Those teams stink. Who cares? It's how they played. It's how they beat them. It's how the offense looked. It's looking at the offense and saying to yourself, you know what? I think this offense has the ability to go from here to here, given how it's made up. That's really what we're looking at from this standpoint on Monday night. I don't take from that game much about beating the Giants, because the Giants, let's face it, you want to talk about a disaster. I think that Brian DeBull is going to be fired at the end of the year. Daniel Jones, he's the classic example of a guy they paid a lot of money, so they got to stick with him, but he stinks. Let's face it. They've got a pretty good running back. They got one pretty good receiver at least. But for the most part, that team isn't very good. And I think that, the Steelers did what you're supposed to do. They beat them. I don't care about that. What I do care about is the fact that Van Jefferson looks like maybe, he could become a bigger part of the offense. Calvin Austin looks like maybe he can become a bigger part of the offense. Mount Washington looks like maybe he can become more of a factor in the passing game. Pat Freiermuth continues to do what he does. They just get a little better and a little better and a little better. And Najee Harris, I thought, ran really hard. The one thing I will say about Najee Harris that was a little bit strange to me, I don't know if he had a little bit of a groin thing going on or a hamstring thing going on, because there were long stretches where he wasn't in the game. And where I sit in the press box, I am literally basically right on the 50-yard line. So I can see everything going on the Steelers sideline from behind. And he was on the sideline a lot. He kept trying to stretch, he was doing all kinds of squats and all kinds of things, like he was trying to stretch something in his leg, whether it was his groin, whether it was hamstring, whatever. So it's something to consider. But the bye week it's actually not a bye week, by the way. It's an open week. You're not getting a bye anywhere. It's an open week. Their open week is now, so he has 2 weeks to recover. But that's something to monitor is hey, does he have a little bit of a tweak in one of his groin or in his hamstring or his quad or something? Something to look at. But I think, honestly, if the Steelers stay healthy, they are going to be a team that is a factor at the end of this thing called the AFC race. Do I think they can beat the Chiefs? Yes, but no. And what I mean, as I said before, the Chiefs, because they've got Patrick Mahomes, someone's got to beat them before I say, yeah, you can beat them. But there's no other team that I'd say, well, boy, if they play that team, they have no chance. They have no shot. And the bottom line is, if I really think about it, I don't know that there's a team really in the NFC either where I'd say the Steelers have no shot. I mean, the NFC, I don't even know who the best team is. I mean, the Lions maybe, or the Vikings, or the one team I wouldn't sleep on is the 49ers. I watched them the other night. If they can figure some things out on defense and they can figure out a way to sort of replace a little bit of what Brandon Ayuk brought to them, I still think they're going to be really, really a factor, and they're going to be difficult to deal with down the stretch. So, but I mean, look at the NFC. The Eagles, I think, are good, but I don't know how good. The Cowboys stink. The Giants stink. Washington is interesting. Now, here's the thing about Washington. Let me just tell you this. Everyone's all excited about this kid, the quarterback they have. Go back and take a look at who Washington has beat this year. And it's not to take anything away from them. I'm pulling it up right here, I think. Yeah. Let me pull this up for you real quick. I was looking at this the other day. I mean, I don't know that I'm really all that impressed with who they beat and how they've beaten them, to be honest. So, to me, here we go. I mean, they beat the Bears the other day on that ridiculous play. They beat the Browns. They beat the Panthers. I mean, I'm looking at their schedule and I'm saying to myself, I need to see more before I'm ready to crown them. They beat the Bengals, who can't beat anybody. They beat the Giants. They beat the Patriots. I don't know. I'm just saying I'm looking at them and I'm saying to myself, I don't know how good they are either. So to me, the Steelers are as good as anybody in the NFL. I didn't think I'd say that 3 weeks ago, honestly. 3 weeks ago, I didn't think I would be saying that. I thought, you know what? They're a team that's going to get to the playoffs and do what they always do, where they lose in the first round because they're just not as good and they can't compete. The big thing is, I think honestly now they can win the AFC North. I mean, I don't see any reason why you shouldn't go 3-1 against the Browns and the Bengals. I'll concede that maybe, Jameis Winston has one of these crazy games where he throws for 400 yards, or, Joe Burrow has one of these crazy games where he goes nuts. Okay, I'll concede that maybe you lose one of those four. But if you win those four, if you go 3-1 in those games and you split with the Ravens, you're basically talking about going 4-2 in your division. You already got 6 wins. That's 10. That puts you at 10. I mean, I don't know. From that point, I think you can beat the Commanders. You got the Eagles, maybe. I mean, we're talking about 11 or 12 wins. It's reachable. It's there. I don't know. I'm just telling you, if you look around the NFL right now, the Steelers can play with anybody, and they are playing as well as anybody. And I know, again, there's some people that say, well, they barely beat the Giants. It's about winning, man. It's about winning. It really is. And I think that's where we're at right now with the Steelers is they're winning. Now they have a chance to go 2 weeks. Basically, they'll take this entire week off. They'll get healthy. They'll get rested, and they'll make their stretch run. And I think that, honestly, this is going to be a pretty exciting stretch run because I think that they have a chance to be really, really good by the time this is all said and done. Now, will that come to fruition? Obviously, there's a couple of things that could happen. Russell Wilson could get hurt. George Pickens could get hurt. They could continue to have all these problems they've had in terms of keeping guys healthy on the offensive line. I mean, there's a lot of variables. Don't get me wrong. But I'm going to tell you, I think really the biggest thing for me is they have a chance, if they can stay healthy, to get better every week and make themselves into a team that can beat you in many, many ways. That's the big thing. We started the year talking about we started the year talking about this. The Steelers needed to keep scores low, rely on their defense, run the football, try not to turn the ball over, don't beat themselves, all that crap. Now, they might be able to win a shootout. They actually now have a margin for error where they haven't had a margin for error the last 3 or 4 years. That's one of the biggest differences when you have a quarterback that can actually throw the ball, that's actually pretty good. You have a margin for error. And they've given themselves that margin for error that they haven't had. Listen, the last few years, they absolutely the last few years needed games to go exactly how they wanted it to go in order to win. They needed to be able to run the ball a little bit and control the ball and control the clock and control the score and keep possessions low. And eke out 13 to 6, 13 to 10, 16 to 13, 19 to 16 type of games. They had to do that because that's the only way they could play. But now, I don't know that they have to do that. And I think that's pretty spectacular because it's been a long time since we've seen a team that can win in a bunch of different ways. It's been a long time since we've seen a team where if they make a couple of mistakes, they can still overcome them because they can score points. And I think that's one of the things that Mike Tomlin has probably realized and figured out, which is why he wanted Russell Wilson, to be his quarterback, or he wanted to go find somebody. He's finally figured that one out. And that is, you're not going to be able to beat teams with defense all the time. You're not going to be able to beat teams where, we're not going to have any negative plays, and, we're not going to turn the ball over, and we're not going to beat ourselves, and we're not going to get penalties, and we're not going to do this, and everything is going to go our way so that we can win the game. You can't win that way in the NFL anymore. In the 70s and 80s, maybe. Probably in the 80s, not even so much, but in the 70s, you could probably still win games with running the ball and playing great defense and, yada, 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 and don't get 10 hurt. It's hard to do that now because a lot of teams have good quarterbacks and a lot of teams have passing games that can, change the game with one play. So, again, are there issues with this team? There absolutely are. I mean, I think the run defense, let's not mince words. The run defense was terrible last night. Got to fix that. I think the overall defense wasn't great last night. They got after the quarterback. They got some timely sacks late. They got some timely sacks, some timely pressures and stuff like that. But the reality is, at times they made Daniel Jones look like he was far better than he actually is. So they have to fix that. They have to work on that. And they have to figure out a couple of other things as well when it comes to their defense. But I don't really worry that much about their defense because their defense, I think, is going to be good when push comes to shove. I've had people say to me, well, what happens if they lose TJ Watt? Okay, well, yeah. What happens if the Chiefs lose Patrick Mahomes? What happens if the Bills lose Josh Allen? Of course, if you lose your best player, it changes everything. But every discussion we have is basically we're saying, hey, here's the thing. What if this team is healthy? That's what I would tell you. So I feel like it's pretty important to note that if your team is healthy, then the sky is the limit. It really is. And so, I feel like that's really what we got to see this weekend is one more step in the progression for the Steelers in terms of where they are at in this great landscape of the AFC. One interesting thing, two interesting things we learned last night. Number one, the play with George Pickens, where 2 feet down, the same foot down twice is not the same as getting 2 feet down. I'm going to tell you, I knew that was a rule, but I didn't know it was a rule. In other words, I knew it was a rule that you had to get both feet down and that 2 feet didn't count. But it was one of those rules that I had read somewhere long ago and kind of knew, but didn't really know. But that was the first thing that we learned. That was a weird play because if you watched it in real time and then they came back and said, we're ruling it incomplete, it was like, well, wait a minute, what is going on here? This is nuts. That was number one. Number two, it was a scoring play, so it was reviewed. I'm convinced that Mike Tomlin simply threw the challenge flag because he was just angry. Because he wasted a timeout throwing his challenge flag. It was already reviewed. And that's basically what they said. The referee came back and said, well, since it was already reviewed, we don't really have to review it again. But guess what? Because they threw the challenge flag, we're taking the timeout away from them. I thought that was kind of bizarre. It was, for all the things that Mike Tomlin does well, he's not very good with the challenge flag. But those were two bizarre things that we saw last night that I thought, you know what, we kind of learned something about the rules with a 2 feet thing. And if you watch it, he did get his right foot down twice, but his left foot doesn't get down in time. But the other part of it was Mike Tomlin challenging a play that was already reviewed. It's like, what are we doing here? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. It really doesn't. And I think his challenges sometimes leave you scratching your head. But again, to me, he's somebody who he's somebody who I think this year has to prove himself. I know people get crazy about that. And I know Tomlin is he's got to prove himself by winning at least a playoff game this year. And so, along the way, these are kinds of things where you look at and say, boy, if you throw the challenge flag and you lose a timeout in the second half of a playoff game, it could come back to haunt you. Little things like that, game management, he's got to clean up a little bit in my mind. He's really good at winning or 10 wins, but some of these little things, game management wise, I think he's got to get a lot better at. I really do. I think that there is basically, what we're trying to do here is continue to get people interested in our YouTube channel. So help us out with the YouTube algorithm, all the stuff that Adam says every day. And we try and build this YouTube channel with the Post-Gazette Sports. But we're gonna do this again tomorrow, 11 a.m. I think. 11 a.m., maybe even the next 2 days, and just try and continue to see if we can make this something that people want to participate in. Obviously, I see your comments. They're good. We will continue to just try and tinker with this and see what happens. How about that? That is my promise to you, I guess, is that we are going to try and involve all of you and see if we can continue to do this and build on this. But tomorrow we'll talk a little bit. We're going to talk about the Steelers, obviously. Talk a little bit about the Penguins, which, by the way, you want to talk about a coach that should be on the hot seat but isn't, it Mike Sullivan. But we'll do that tomorrow. Until such time, thank you for joining us, and we will see you, well, tomorrow.